right, the board is back in open session. At this time, are there any, no, let's see, okay, at this point, we are going to have a public hearing on the 2017 property tax levy. So at this point, is there a motion to open the public hearing on the 2017 property tax levy?
So moved.
Second.
Margie, please call the roll.
Ms. Clyber? Aye. Mr. Regan?
Aye.
Mr. Marple?
Aye.
Mr. Hunt?
Aye.
Ms. Murphy? Aye. Mr. Barsadi?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Motion carried.
Thanks, Margie. At this point, does any member of the public like to comment about the 2017 property tax levy? Seeing that no one wants to comment, then we will adjourn the public hearing. Margie, please call the roll to adjourn the public hearing. Is there a motion to adjourn the public hearing?
So moved.
Second.
Margie, please call the roll.
Mr. Marple?
Aye.
Mr. Hunt?
Aye.
Ms. Clyber? Aye. Ms. Murphy? Aye. Mr. Barsadi?
Aye.
Mr. Regan?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Motion carried.
Thanks, Margie. Next up, we have public comment. Is there any public comment? If there is no public comment, we move on to proposed changes to the agenda. Does any board member have any changes, proposed changes to the agenda? If not, we move on to the consent agenda. So at this point, would the board secretary like to...
Superintendent's report.
Oh, sorry, I skipped the superintendent's report. Apologize.
You're in a hurry.
We next move on to the superintendent's report.
And I actually
Martha,
have very
do you
little. We
any,
could have almost skipped it tonight, but I don't have any student presenters with it being so close to the holiday, and I know our students have been busy, families are busy this time of year, so we'll bring students back next month, certainly, but really this is more of a public service announcement and just reminding parents and the community to complete the 5 Essentials survey that's available through each of our schools. So that will be open until late January.
Thanks, Martha. So now we move on to the consent agenda. So at this point, would the board secretary like to read the consent agenda, please?
Tonight's consent agenda includes the minutes of the previous meetings, including the regular business meeting on November 15th and the committee of the whole meeting on December 6th. We also have the personnel report and the payables pre-list of November 30th and December 20th, all of 2017. We need a motion to...
Thanks, Joel. At this point, does anyone have anything they'd like to pull off the pre-list? If not, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda
So moved.
as presented? Margie, please call the roll.
Mr. Barsadi?
Aye.
Ms. Clyber? Aye. Mr. Regan?
Aye.
Mr. Hunt?
Aye.
Mr. Marple?
Aye.
Ms. Murphy? Aye. Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Motion carried.
Thanks, Margie. Next item is the Riverside Educational Council. Do we have any comments from the Riverside Educational Council? If not, we move on to board member comments. Does anyone have anything they would like to share about activities they've seen recently? Or
I went to the 7th grade and about orchestra concert, and then they had the chorus sing. It was, of course, beautiful. And so appreciative to have Miss Gill one more year. So it's lovely.
anyone else? If not, then we move on to the committee reports. First is the policy committee. Dan, does anything report on the policy committee?
One minor report. I know the the behavioral policy that we've discussed and pulled off. I think we've got a version of that released from press. We're not ready to present it at this time, but we'll be reviewing that in the near future.
Thanks, Dan. Next up is education committee. Sherry?
Yeah, we had 3 different pieces. We talked about strategic planning priorities, a world language report, and reporting student progress. So we made a lot of, ground on a lot of big topics. So that's all.
Thanks, Sherry. And then finance committee. Rich, do you have anything to report on the finance committee?
Nothing to report. I just wanted to, as an action item in old business, it's the District 96 tax levy. I wanted to thank Mr. Holmes and Ms. Ryan Toy for the great work that they did in preparing all these documents and answering all of our questions along the way. Great job.
Great. So, on the topic of the 2017 tax levy, don't know if Mr. Holmes, if you'd like to come up just and remind us one more time of what the amount of the levy is, and if there's anything that in particular that we or the public needs to think needs to hear about.
Just that the levy request is going to be $25,160,072, which represents a 3% increase over the prior year extension. And I don't know if there's any other questions regarding it.
Any other questions? All right, if not.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Holmes.
Thank you.
At this point, is there a motion for the Board of Education to approve the tax year 2017 tax levy resolution for a levy amount total of $25,160,072? In addition, a certificate of compliance with the Truth in Taxation Act, and finally, a resolution authorizing reduction of certain fund levies for the 2017 levy year as presented. Is there any further discussion about the levy? If not, then Marjorie, please call the roll.
Mr. Regan?
Aye.
Ms. Murphy?
Aye.
Mr. Bersadi?
Aye.
Mr. Hunt?
Aye.
Mr. Marhold?
Aye.
Ms. Kleiber?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Motion carried.
Thanks, Margie. Next item in old business is policy 820, community use of school facilities. This is a topic that we've had a few edits in the committee of the whole, and now Dan and Martha have come back with what looks like all of the edits that we had requested. So at this point, is there a motion for the board to approve the amended policy 820, community use of school facilities as presented?
So moved.
Second. Is there any further discussion of this policy or any other questions people have? If not, Marjorie, please call the roll.
Ms. Murphy?
Aye.
Mr. Marhold?
Aye.
Ms. Kleiber?
Aye.
Mr. Bersadi?
Aye.
Mr. Regan?
Aye.
Mr. Hunt?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Motion carried.
Thanks, Margie. The third item on old business is the curriculum instruction district goal number 4, which was the goal that authorized the administration and the teachers to examine the report card and see if that can be improved and better aligned with student learning. We had a few discussions about that. At this point, is there a motion to approve the amended policy, a motion to approve the 2017-2018 curriculum instruction district goal number 4 as presented?
So moved.
Second. Is there any further discussion on this particular goal?
I just want to thank Grandma Martha because I think this reads a lot clearer. I think it's much easier for the public to understand. And yeah, I think this is great. So
I agree.
Thank you for looking at.
I agree. Any other questions or comments?
No, it's good, clean language.
Then, if not, Marjorie, please call the roll.
Mr. Hunt?
Aye.
Mr. Bersadi?
Aye.
Ms. Kleiber? Mr. Regan?
Aye.
Mr. Marhold?
Aye.
Ms. Murphy?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Motion carried.
Thanks, Margie. That was the, then we have the strategic plan meeting update. Martha, did you want to?
Sure, that's really just a reminder to hold the date. March 14th of 2018 will be our strategic plan annual review, and I'll be working with Bob Madonia around some of the comments and conversations that we had before about how could we perhaps do more sharing out of what's going on in the different goal areas, and also look at a way to engage community members, sort of not having to maybe just select and stay with one of the subgroup areas, but be able to kind of hear progress toward all the goal areas, and whether that's a rotation or kind of a share out more in a town hall style. So we'll be looking at some format. We have time. Seeing the date that really worked for everybody is a little further into the new year, but I think actually it'll be good timing. We'll have a little more information that's been shared about our facilities plan by then, and so I think there'll be even more information to share at that point in the year.
And Martha, I just have one question. I think when we first had looked with Bob Madonia, he talked about how he did things, a few different ways. So I would guess he would be fairly receptive and creative ways to.
Yeah.
I was trying to remember what he'd said. He said he's worked with so many districts that can kind of tailor it.
Yeah.
Is that still
Yeah,
the
and
case?
yeah, right, and we will schedule more time to talk after the new year, and then I'll come back to you and share a little more about the format. But I think it was clear, let's have, be able to hear from all the areas more, and then perhaps more sharing out even from the district administration about what's been going on in the different goal areas.
All right, thanks. Any other comments or questions about the strategic planning update? If not, we move on to new business. The first item in new business is the 2018-2019 official school calendar draft. So we have a draft in board book. Martha, did you want to make say anything about the draft calendar?
Sure, so it is in draft status. It's something that the board then could potentially approve at the next meeting. We do confer with Riverside Brookfield High School. One goal is to match the spring break and winter breaks for families that have students in both districts. It's a very comparable calendar to this current year's calendar. It addresses 3 institute days for the teachers before school starts. The start date is about a week later than the high school. That I think is becoming somewhat typical as high schools seem to start a little earlier and earlier. I think their goal is to get in final exams before winter break. Our goal is to give families a slightly longer summer, and this seems to work well for our calendar and our families in following this model. Still keeping parent-teacher conferences around the Thanksgiving timeframe. Winter break is there as you can see it. So again, I think it's not that it's completely standardized how our calendar operates, but it sort of falls into a certain set of parameters that this fits.
So it's very similar to this year's calendar,
Yeah.
essentially.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone have any comments about the calendar?
I think it works really well. It's just, maybe I'm speaking personally, but to have holiday time where you can have conferences, but then let people leave and not have to miss school, I think it's a nice, flexible approach. But
In terms of like the parent-teacher conference.
yeah,
and
the
Thanksgiving.
longer holidays,
Uh-huh.
I think, work pretty well. And I don't know about the institute days. Meryl, I think it's working okay. So
So we'll know how the January one goes.
Yeah.
It's the first Tuesday we try, but the teachers and the committee like the idea of keeping the week
keeping
not broken up too.
Yeah.
Just break up 1 week instead of 2 weeks for
Right.
instructional purposes. So right now, I think the feedback from them is
good.
I'd like to do that next year.
right. So yeah, that's good.
I agree. The calendar looks very good. So I don't have anyone else have anything to say about it. If not, then we move on to the next item, which is the Facility Advisory Committee timeline. Martha, if you wanted to maybe tell us about the timeline.
So the Facilities Advisory Committee had an opportunity to preview a master facility plan developed by our architect, with the idea being that the Facilities Advisory Committee will be asked to review that as a draft status, and then to bring it back to another Facilities Advisory Committee on February 2nd, with the goal being to present it to the Committee of the Whole, therefore to the public on February 7th. And let's see, with, again, sort of, and so the dates are kind of established there for you. February 21 would be a regular board meeting, where maybe then we'd be ready to look at like a concept design for Ames construction. And then with holding March 7th as Committee of the Whole to look at how we might address long-range financial projections and capital improvements and debt service options. And maybe March to look at next steps for Ames construction. It is, again, not for summer of 18, but then potentially could be for summer of 19, depending on the kinds of decisions and the scope of the project, et cetera. So Rich or Linda, who are on the committee, are there other information you'd like to share?
No, I think that covers it. It's what we're going to be showing you on February 2nd really represents a lot of work. So Linda and I, amongst family time over the break here, we're going to be cuddling up with a 1,000-page document and getting comments back to Martha and our architect.
Sounds fun.
Just so you guys know, what you should be expecting is a long list of everything compiled that needs to get done over the next 10 years, would like, possible options. So there certainly is no decisions made on like what projects we would or wouldn't be moving forward with. That would be after we all review the document. So it's a really foundational level thing, but I'm excited because I think it's really going to let us start talking about exciting things. So
Remind me who the committee consists of? You and Rich and Mark, obviously.
Right, so it's essentially what we call like our cabinet level team. So it's Meryl, Pam, Don Tufano, Rob, Jason Smith is also on it, and Bill Radke, 2 board members, myself. I think that's it, right?
That's it.
Margie, yeah.
Thank you.
Does anyone have any specific comments or questions about the proposed timeline? If not, I think it looks good to me. I mean, I think it looks like a
Exciting.
reasonable timeline.
Excited
Yeah.
to start actually talking about all this.
Yeah.
And then we move on to the last item in new business, which is a review of Board of Education's district facilities prioritization. I asked for this to be put on there just to remind people. In August, the facilities committee presented a draft of some potential ideas that they were thinking about, might be interesting in the board. At that point in time, prioritized them, gave them, high, medium, or low. And I've been thinking about our priorities a bit, and one of them, I'm no longer sure about something that we said was a low priority, and I'm not totally convinced that it should be a low priority, and that is the idea that the Facilities Committee came back with, which is potentially to do something with the Blythe Park Auditorium. Currently, it's a very big auditorium that sits underneath the gym. It's big enough for 2 or 3 large classrooms, I would think, just by looking at it. And at that time, when in August, we said this was a low priority item, and I think that my motivation, and I don't know, I can't speak for others at the time, was that we already have plenty of room at Blythe for what we currently use it for. It doesn't make a lot of sense to actually add more room at Blythe if we're going to continue to use Blythe in the same way. The question I have is whether we should consider whether our current use of Blythe is the best use of Blythe. And I think there are a couple of things I'd like to ask the board to think about in that context tonight, and possibly revisit this priority if people think that it makes sense. And one of the issues, I think, is Blythe size. So Blythe currently has 11 large classrooms. If we added a couple more classrooms to Blythe, let's say in the auditorium, that would be a full 2-section school. I'm forgetting about the preschool for a moment, but that would be a 2 full-section school.
2 rooms? You're talking 2
Even
classrooms?
with 11 rooms, we could do everything without art and music. If we add 2 more rooms, we get art and music. We basically have a 2 full. We go from a 1-section school to a 2 full-section, a full 2-section school. So that's something that it's something to consider, because currently we're using it as a 1 plus the preschool. It could be 2. The second consideration, I think, is the distribution of students in the district. Where do the students live? Currently, we've got about 370 students at Ames. We've got about 400 at Central. We've got about 130 at Blythe, and we've got 130 at Hollywood, give or take. If you were to ask the question, given the current distribution of students, where would the students sort of go to school if they went to their closest school? Ames would be identical. Ames would have the same number of students, 370. Blythe would have 100 more students, so we have 220, almost the 2 full sections. Central would lose those 100 students, it would go from 400 to 300, and Hollywood would be the same, because Hollywood is sort of disconnected, geographically. So just from the point of view of the proximity of students, there's an argument as well that maybe students kind of naturally live closer to Blythe anyway, so that's another consideration. Reducing Central by 100 students would reduce the overcrowding in Central. We know that from the architect's report that just measured in terms of students per square foot, Central is actually the most crowded school. So there's something to be said for that, possibly. A fourth consideration might be cost. It might be cheaper to build out the auditorium, which is purely an inside job, than to build, new break ground in a new area. The downside, of course, is that the auditorium is actually a very charming room, and I would hate to destroy it without very good reason. So that that's something to consider. Another consideration is the history at Blythe, going back at least to 2001, which is the earliest records that I see. Blythe has been run as a larger than one section school. It's been typically 8 sections, sometimes 9, sometimes 7. So that was really, I think, the part of the whole flexible boundary program, which is that Blythe was essentially running as a 1.5 section school. So it was done historically, and it was done up until 2013, 14, 2014, 15, when 2 sections of Blythe, or the 2 double sections of Blythe rolled off, and they weren't replaced. And that was the only way that Ames actually could work, because Ames couldn't take the 3 sections. There was always the 2 sections of Blythe. So that was something. That's another fact, is that, you know, that has been a solution that's been looked at in the past. And then finally is the consideration, which again, I'm not sure how much weight to put on this, but I've been told that in some ways, if you ask what is the optimal school size in terms of the number of sections, there may be arguments that it's bigger than 1. That is to say, there may be benefits to the school itself from having more than 1 section, because, you know, if possible, because then there's more teacher collaboration and there's more students. And in some schools we can't do that easily. For example, Hollywood is not so easy because it's geographically there. We can't make it. There's not enough students to make it 2 sections. But if we have the opportunity to make it 2 sections, is that something that we should consider? So those are some considerations that, you know, I've been thinking about a little bit, and I want to come back to the board and ask, do we want to think a little bit about whether Blythe seems like a wild card in a way? You know, it's like, what we decide to do, how we decide to use Blythe, it should maybe in some ways influence the decision we make about what the priority should be in terms of that auditorium. So I don't know, I kind of want to throw it open for discussion, what people think about, you know, that.
Can you tell me what would be the implications on the early learners?
Well, that's a question. So I think if you were to say we're going to make Blythe a big, this is a question for the administration, but one thing you could do is you couldn't do that overnight.
Right.
It would have to be next year we'd start 2 kindergartens at Blythe. That would take no more space than is currently being taken, because there's already a half day kindergarten. So we'd have a year basically for free, and I think there's actually a little bit of space at Blythe anyway. So what we would have to think about the preschool, you know, down the road, where would we put that if we're going to make Blythe a 2 section school? We would have to think about that.
Well, because that's, you know, moving it somewhere else. So,
right, exactly.
Yeah,
right.
The options would be moving it back to Hollywood, which was a very tight squeeze.
Right.
Moving it to Central, which is
Central would be losing 100 students.
Would be
so
losing students.
If you did that gradual, very gradual, wouldn't happen overnight. It happened over 5 years, 6 years, basically.
Right. I guess I see your point. I think it's a good point. I think the thing is, though, when we prioritize this, I don't think there was a discussion of making it a 2-section school
Correct.
at that time.
Yeah.
So
That's right. That's exactly
I think
right.
if we sort of looked at it that way, the priority might have been.
Yeah. And I really do think these priorities after February, when we look at the master facilities plan,
May change.
They're going to totally change. I mean, they might not, but they could, and I
Right.
think we need to be open to that.
I agree.
Because before we spend, you know, money on the Ames construction, I think we should be looking at all of these possibilities,
Right.
The pros and cons.
Jeff, a few of your points jumped out to me. I mean, my first was a hesitation, thinking, what is Jeff talking about now? I think we all thought that, right?
What are you saying?
But clearly, refitting an existing space is going to be much less than a brand new addition, right? Another important point is that, you know, and I speak from experience, that I hear residents say, I live 3 blocks away from this school. Why are you guys sending me over here? So this really makes more natural boundaries by doing this.
So we would be changing the boundaries then.
You would have to, and here's the tricky part, is that in the kindergarten there's only 150. Well, there's any given section there's 140, 150. As we get to the higher grades, it's more because we get people move in, so it grows from 140 up to maybe 190. But any given year, at any given point in time, the kids are scattered in some random way, you know.
Right,
So
right.
you can't, if you're trying to fill up this school and that school, the boundaries can't be fixed. They have to be a little bit flexible.
And even if you phase it in that way,
you're still going to have, there's still going to be people
I
who
could
are
have
going
a
to say,
second grader
hey, I
who
live
goes
over
to
here,
Central,
right?
and you're going to say, oh, my kindergartners
Yes.
now go to Blythe, but they're not going to because they're going to stay.
Exactly.
So-
You have to still grandfather people in. So it's not going to be a perfect solution by any means. There are no perfect solutions.
But you know, alleviating the pressure on Central, the impact may be that we don't have to move the district office then as well. So that could eliminate that problem.
Right. Possibly.
You know, so doing this, obviously it needs a deeper look, but
I
I think
agree.
at a cursory level, I think you hit some good points that now I
We
think
can
it's
see how
the
much it costs.
administration's turn.
Right, exactly. I mean, that's,
And-
Well, that's a historic building. Can someone tell me, I don't know if Joel can help with this. I realize it's an interior space, but how would that affect historical nature
I
of the
think
building, and
the-
would that be a problem?
The historical rules are more geared toward
Just the exterior.
exterior effects and not so much interior. The goal being that reuse is always good.
The landmarking status typically covers facade,
It could-
but we'd have to
exactly.
look at the landmarking designation for that space
Right.
to make sure.
yeah, and
that we can do that.
I wouldn't want to change it lightly because it is a very charming room and it's very
Right.
beautiful and historic.
Absolutely.
Yeah, a lot of integrity there. So I wouldn't want to just like randomly
Proud of that.
tear it out. But
Also,
Yeah, where would they hold their events?
Probably in the gym. So they do a lot of
No,
all
it's a
school events in the
different
gymnasium.
kind of vibe, and it's
Yeah.
loud,
Yeah.
you know, the sound is,
Yeah.
there's a whole lot of issues. Yeah, I know.
yeah, Ames and Hollywood did that, right?
I know, I
About
realize.
it, yeah.
I think it's worthy of deeper consideration.
Yeah, no,
Really
I
do.
completely agree.
It's a good idea.
It's worthy of deeper consideration, but I agree though that the architectural nature of that school, the reputation of it, the fact that it pretty much is cherished by the community there,
Right.
is intact. That's something that we'd be very careful about.
I agree.
I don't know to what degree the auditorium plays a part of that role, but if there's some kind of architectural spirit that gets changed or altered by that,
I agree.
it's something we need to consider.
Well, I think we should hope that now that this is being recorded, that, that maybe community members see it and share their opinions
Yeah,
about it.
I think
So
that
we
would
have
be
more
great,
immediate
actually, if
feedback.
anyone out there from Blythe has opinions about the auditorium
You should
or
point at
about
the camera when you say this.
making it 2 seconds or whatever. Since no one is in the audience.
Some people.
Well, I think
Some
too,
people,
what's interesting about some of what you put together, Jeff, is that Ames does not change very much.
Ames does not change at all, basically.
Yeah.
In all of the study you did, Ames is the most stable of all the schools in terms of the attendance areas.
It's because
Which-
most of the population is sitting right behind Ames, so
Yes.
it can't go anywhere else, basically. Whereas Blythe and Central, there's a, big border there.
I think that lends, the point I was making was it lends still to the fact that Ames is on our high priority
Mhm. I
list.
agree.
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah. I live in a section that would switch, my boundary would switch.
Yeah, you're right in the center of things,
I
aren't you?
would switch, we would switch to life, so it'd be, it wouldn't affect me, but it would.
Right.
The final thing I was gonna say is being below a gym. I've never really been in the Blythe Auditorium while events are happening, like, I've been in the central multi-purpose room while gym is going on above it, and
Yeah.
it's not a great educational
very
space.
loud.
So
Maybe
I
the
would be very
architect would have to
concerned
check
about,
out, right.
I mean, it would have to be, like,
Right.
it couldn't be that.
There-
It would
there's
have
a
to be,
definite impact
you would not be
on
able to hear the basketball game,
Right.
like,
Well, it'd probably be very easy to check. I mean, just go there during the day when they're running around up there,
yeah.
See if they're-
I'd also want to hear again from Mr. Garvin about current concerns about the usage of that building. I realize that the population is more stable, but it's still a very tightly spliced up place, and we've got people in closet-sized rooms.
Oh, I agree.
So I need to hear, I would like to hear.
I agree.
I think it's great to keep an eye.
It's almost decoupled, actually. That problem's almost decoupled. It's like the Central Blythe is
Maybe,
decoupled from.
yeah, maybe.
But this doesn't mean that there wouldn't be improvements made at Ames.
I
This
agree.
doesn't
That's
take
why-
that
when I
off.
say
Right.
decoupled, that's what I mean, is
That's
that-
what I'm trying to get
Right.
at, is
Yeah.
I don't
Right.
want to
There's separate-
forget the
there's separate
places that
problems.
need their own.
Right.
But it would certainly, it could have implications on what we do at Ames,
It could have implications, right?
which is
right.
why I think we need to talk
Right.
about it now.
That's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. So I guess that my question to the board is this, this isn't like we're making a decision, it's more, do we want to up the priority for the facilities committee to sort of like look at it more carefully? That's the question.
I guess I would say we should up the priority with the consideration that we're doing, splitting into 2 sections. If it was like the original, as it was originally presented.
Which was
Right.
like extra,
Right, then-
collaborative space.
No,
I agree.
I don't think we should.
I agree. It's conditional on using
Yeah.
Blythe for a different
Well, in the
purpose.
ECE consideration, I need to hear about that,
Yeah.
too.
Right. Right. Again, it's not a decision. It's more like, do we
No, I
want to
just
take
want
a
ideas,
closer look?
like, where do you,
Right. Right.
where do you think it would go? And-
Right.
Yeah.
So part of this lies with the administration, and
Mm-hmm.
part of it lies back with the facility committee, wouldn't you say?
Yes.
But I think it helps the committee with some direction. The committee has been thinking about configurations. I mean, and so again, not making recommendations, but having, conversation about that. So I think this adds to that
I think
conversation.
it's important to talk about all of, we are such a space
We need to
limited
talk about
school. I
options,
don't think everything should be on the table for discussion, certainly.
That's right.
Just, even this discussion doesn't mean we're gonna do anything, but I think it's in our best interest before we
Right.
spend money on construction to
That's
talk
right.
about every possible space in the
That's
district.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions on this? Or are we all in agreement to sort of increase the priority, to have the facilities committee administration study this more carefully than they otherwise would have when it was
I agree with Dave's modification.
conditional on that,
Yeah.
that if
Right,
we
with
change the
Dave's
use, basically. We wouldn't do this
contingency,
with the
right.
current use.
Yep.
Everyone, you guys agree?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, sounds like we have an agreement then. All right. So then, at this point, we come to public comment. Is there any public comment at this point? Any further public comment?
This is the fastest meeting ever.
Yeah, it is actually pretty fast, isn't it? Wow. If there's no public comment, then future meeting dates are January 3rd, Committee of the Whole is canceled. January 17th, the regular business meeting at 7 p.m. at Hauser. And then February 21st, February 7th, Committee of the Whole meeting, 7 p.m. at Hauser as well. And then February 21st, regular business meeting, 7 p.m. at Hauser. So if there's no further business, then the meeting's adjourned.